Welcome to the Entrepreneur Exchange on the Mesh Podcast Network, a monthly conversation about startups and business with ideas, tools, and advice to operate your business more effectively. On today's show, you've got some capital and you want to acquire a business. How about a truck driving school? We've got two guests with us today, Bob Boniface and Tyrell Salter, who are now running Transtech Truck Driving School. That's a tongue twister for some of us. We'll hear how they got involved in the trucking game. We'll also have some small businesses of the month for you to be checking out, so stay with us. My name is Jeff Newell. I'm your co-host. I'm director of the Manufacturing Solutions Center in Conover, North Carolina. I'm joined by my co-host, Gary Muller, who is Executive Dean of Economic Development and Corporate Education at Catawba Valley Community College in Hickory. Gary, how are you doing today?
Jeff, I'm doing great. We've had a great spring season for our baseball teams and our golf teams at Wake Forest. One won a national championship. Baseball team came one run short.
One run short, but you had a fabulous season. Wake Forest baseball team was like ranked number one throughout the year, so congratulations on that.
We're excited about it.
And last week you did your Skills USA dance down in Atlanta?
Yes, and it was fantastic. And I guess as much as I love Wake Forest, I was happier for our CVCC skills students to do really well. We won 4 gold medals, 2 silver, and 3 bronze, the most of anybody in the country.
And how did you do in the dance competition?
I did well,
yeah,
because I didn't.
Okay, well, good for you. I suspect...
my wife doesn't let me dance or sing in public.
I would think that you two would make a very handsome dance couple.
She's great. She didn't say anything about herself. It was me that can't do it in public.
Okay, well, we're going to push you on that. We would like to see some dancing from you at some point in time.
Okay, we'll work on that.
No singing, though.
No singing.
Okay. Well, we're very fortunate today to have two guests with us, Bob Boniface and Tyrell Salter. Guys, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having us. Morning.
We appreciate you guys joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So you're relatively young entrepreneurs. I say that because Gary and I are pretty old, but you seem to be relatively young entrepreneurs. And tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and how you met in truck driving school. Why truck driving school?
And how they got here.
Yeah. And we'll let you guys talk. We talk too much. Go ahead.
Yeah, sounds good. I can kick it off. So I grew up in Fernie, British Columbia, a little small town in the mountains of Canada, western side of Canada. Kind of 3 things to do in Western Canada, and that's forestry, mining, or oil and gas. And so my dad was in the mining industry. He said, don't go into mining. So I went into oil and gas. I went and became a geological engineer out of the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. I went to work for an ExxonMobil subsidiary called Imperial Oil. They actually operate oil sands mines, so it ended up being a blend of the two. So I spent 4 years commuting from Calgary, Alberta, up to just north of Fort McMurray as a geotechnical engineer. Mm-hmm. So job role was, kind of organizing operations crews, working with trucks, albeit a lot bigger trucks than what you see on the highway. And then I went to business school, and that's where I met Bob. It's also where I met my wife, so it worked out really
combination,
well.
Yeah.
Great combination. It's also where I learned about entrepreneurship through acquisition, or the asset class called search funds. We can get more into that later as well, but Bob and I decided to pair up, and we can talk about that too, and pursue buying a blue-collar business. Really why we got into truck driver training, as I mentioned kind of in our preamble, was in blue-collar businesses, we kept running this problem. Not enough CDL drivers. Staffing was an issue. So we said, okay, how do we go upstream of that? How do we, correct some of that issue? Perhaps there's a business proposition there. What are the existing businesses working, doing that? Then we came across Transtech, who is part of a sale process, and we participated in that process. And we closed the deal on January 20th. So we're coming up, I guess, is like 5.5, 6 months.
6 months.
6 months. Yeah. Behind the wheel.
And Bob, what's your background?
So I'm from Detroit originally. I come from an automotive family. My dad's a car designer at General Motors, and his dad collected old cars. So I went to Vanderbilt for college, moved back up to Detroit, ended up working in the auto industry. Found my way to General Motors as well, was working in manufacturing finance there. So was overseeing the plants that make pickup trucks and Suburbans and Tahoes kind of across the U.S.
I got one of them.
You got one of those. Yeah. So, we was in charge of that plant from a financial standpoint. But loved the auto industry, loved operational finance. I thought it was really cool getting to go to the plants and working with the line staff there to figure out how to make the businesses better, figuring out how to move pieces around and people around to make it more efficient. So when I went to business school, I was coming out thinking that I was going to go back in the auto industry. But like Tyrell, came across this search fund idea, really resonated with me because, I had always had this entrepreneurial itch, but never felt like I had a good enough idea or I'd say the fortitude or courage maybe to pursue something from the ground up. And so what we saw was it's still entrepreneurship because you're taking something that is, a working idea, has customers, has cash flow, but there's so much that you can do to improve the business to really take it to the next level.
To take it to the next level.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely. And so that's what really intoxicated us with it. And I think it resonated with me because in the auto industry in Detroit, as in many kind of cities around the U.S., you've got a network of small business owners that have the ability to really, kind of affect change in their small companies in a way that you don't really have in a big company.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys both seem to have that entrepreneurial itch, and usually when people think about entrepreneurships, they're thinking about scalable businesses and what that. So how did you guys arrive at truck driving?
Yeah, so search funds really, it's based on a buyout model, right? So the idea is evaluate the cash flows and the stability of the cash flows of that model. Oftentimes put some leverage on it in order to buy it. Search funds kind of address this problem where some businesses are subscale, where institutional money, the private equity funds, the other buyout firms, they can't really reach down into that side of the market, of which there are tens of thousands of those businesses in the United States. Also, we're in a demographic shift where a lot of the founders of those original businesses are retiring. Yeah. They may not have a successor, completely lined up. So you have this market of sellers. You've got good businesses with recurring revenue cash flows and various other properties that are attractive. So our goal when we set out was we said, hey, we know there's a ton of businesses that are blue collar specific that are maybe missing some of the technology. Software still, when we're talking about growing a business, obviously they have some of the best trajectories from a valuation standpoint. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them have been picked over by growth equity. Reaching down, kind of paying multiples based on annual recurring revenue versus EBITDA multiples, like in the blue collar world, means that a lot of smaller firms have already been seen. They brought a lot of the technology to them, being technology firms themselves. So why we chose kind of blue collars, we said, hey, look, we got a guy from ExxonMobil, we got a guy from General Motors. Why don't we put those two together and go buy a business that still has high quality cash flow, but maybe is a little bit behind on this tech piece or was overlooked by some of those institutional players. So like I mentioned, we looked at freight early on. There's plenty of small freight companies out there, plenty of porta-john companies, waste management, like dirty businesses. We didn't discriminate on the business model.
That would be very tempting, to get into those sort of things.
Yeah, we talked to a couple hundred business owners over the course of a couple months there. Like you said, scrap yards, a lot of oil field services. But we came back to kind of the truck driving thing because this demographic shift on the trucker side as well. And you talk about scalable. We had with TransTech when we found that it was a 8-branch. Now we're a 10-branch operation. We're the biggest trainer in the state of North Carolina. Where we already have a winning model. We've got a curriculum that is really successful with preparing people for becoming safe professional truck drivers. We've got a great instructor staff, we've got a great recruiting staff. And so we think we have a model here now that has allowed us to kind of break out of that trap that you see with a lot of small businesses where you are subscale and you're spending so much time working in the business that you can't work on the business. We've kind of escaped that escape velocity, and so now we can kind of plug and play, and now we can kind of pick our targets in terms of markets in which to expand.
Yeah. Very good.
The last maybe comment I'll have on that is I think we started looking at blue collar businesses, and from the outside, CDL training seems like that, but it's actually an education business, and I think that's a lot more palatable because one of the things that we look at in buyouts is, well, are the sellers just selling at a high? And so we saw a ton of freight companies last summer trying to sell because they knew spot rates were through the roof. their cash flows are the best they're probably ever going to look. And now we have a freight recession. Why education gave us a little bit more confidence that we weren't buying some cyclical business was really, it's bolstered by two ends. One is the freight companies that need drivers, but also the students that need jobs.
Yep.
So we were confident even heading into a recession as people retool and reskill to put food on the table, we would still have business coming in. So we weren't kind of, one-to-one tied with the freight market.
I think it's really important to say the education business as well as the trucking business, because it really is. That's what you're selling.
That's not like something a person working for the community college would say, Gary.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right.
It's true.
And
No, that's the good reason.
I'm assuming, I don't know what sort of salary a truck driver can make, but I assume that they can do pretty well once they graduate from a program like this.
It is, in our minds, and maybe we're a little bit biased, but it's the highest return on investment that you can have in education. So, for example, our program from end to end for a motivated student is about 4 weeks long. The average truck driver salary in North Carolina, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is about $79,000. Yeah. And so, like Tyrell mentioned, we're in a freight recession right now after the kind of this hangover from the last couple of years of the supply chain crisis. We're still being beat over the head from employers that are desperate for drivers. So not only is it a quick program with a stable job on the other side that pays really well, you can go work for these big name companies and you have a lot of options, I think, that you don't have in other trades potentially.
One of the things that Gary and I have talked about before with people is, when you're partnering with somebody, there's got to be a nice level of trust there, and sometimes your goals might diverge somewhat. I mean, how did you guys come together, decide to be business partners, and have a degree of comfort that you were rowing in the same direction?
We did it methodically, and it might be the engineer in me, but so between my first sec year of business school, I went and tried the investment banking route, and I kind of did a 180 and was like, this is way too corporate. I miss the mine. I miss, the blue collar. So, I was left with like, oh crap, what am I going to do with my career? And then took the first class of entrepreneurship through acquisition at Harvard Business School, and that's where I met Bob. He was in the same section. So, you would make comments on the cases and things like that. We didn't know each other, super well. Our friend groups kind of, I guess, overlapped a little bit. But, as you're considering that, you'd be reaching out to other people that have walked the path saying, hey, what business did you buy? You'd talk to other investors, hey, would you give me money if I started looking? And so we started kind of swapping notes on who have you talked to, who else, because that's another way to get in touch with another investor or another searcher and gather more information. So it started kind of swapping notes with that. And then kind of the blue collar thesis developed as, okay, well, this software thing doesn't feel like it fits my background. I think we both kind of came to that conclusion at the same time. There's also a financial incentive. The returns in the asset class would prove over time that partnered searchers do better together. And so kind of the wisdom that's passed on from the professors is, hey, if you can get a business partner and you can align well on your skill sets, like seriously consider that. So I made a spreadsheet and I ranked myself on qualities that I thought I could do well in operations and areas that maybe I lacked that strength. And then I posed the same kind of survey to Bob. And then I also downloaded a list of...
It sounds like a Tinder type thing.
Yes, exactly. Yes, forced. Yeah, it's a forced ranking. And what was good about that is I think we had very complementary skill sets, being finance background versus operations crew background, and an engineer side. So the other thing I did is I downloaded a list of every city in the United States over, I think it was 250,000 people, and I ranked them from, yes, I want to live there, 1, maybe I would do it for the right business, and 3, absolutely not. I had my wife do the same thing.
That's important.
Yes, yep.
Trust me.
And then I had Bob do the same thing. And so I think we had like an 80% overlap between the three of us. Because we didn't want to get stuck in a situation where we're looking for a business and Bob's like, I want to live in Detroit.
This looks like a great business, but I don't want to live there.
Right.
Come heck or high water.
Yep. Right.
Now, I would think that some people, Bob, would say, hey, I've got a lunatic give me spreadsheets with all these questions. Apparently that resonated with you in some way?
Yeah, I was looking for someone a little bit crazy.
Okay.
We should have tried that. Or did we?
I think we came together in different ways.
That's
Gary.
right.
So
they're a little bit more formal than we are.
yeah.
I think it was a good way to level set it at least. you're commenting on kind of make sure you're rowing in the right direction. I think that was a good way to at least table stakes. We're thinking the same thing. We like the same types of businesses. Here are what our base skills are. I would mention we also went on a ski trip. We went up to Stowe just for a weekend, just to make sure, hey, can we tolerate each other and hang out and have fun outside of kind of business?
You did due diligence on each other.
Yes, a little bit of due diligence, yeah.
So we guess that worked out. Nobody broke anything. And
it was icy. It was an icy weekend up there. But
that was more fun than the survey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so you mentioned that you use search funds, and usually when some sort of private equity is involved, in I guess our experience, you probably have some short-term goals. You might have some longer-term goals. Talk a little bit about your goals, and is there some sort of end game where you get to a certain point where you might sell and move on to the next thing?
Yeah, I think short-term goals and what we focused on in the last 6 months or so, because we're at that 6-month mark now, is a lot of cultural stuff. So, buying a family business, buying any small business, you're going to have to contend with. It doesn't feel like you're working at General Motors or ExxonMobil. So you got to put in some policies, some rules. How you're going to kind of interact with one another, because I think that really sets the building blocks for being able to make it out into that kind of small to medium sized business. So that's a lot what we've been focusing on. I think short term goals from here. We want to continue to invest in the state of North Carolina. I think we have a really dominant position here, and I think with the work that we've done on the people side, we're actively bringing in new people, talking to people that were already within TransTech, which is great, because what we had there was a lot of people that had a lot of great ideas that were easy for us to say yes to. So that was the easiest part. In terms of long term goals,
Yeah, and I'd touch on short term. I think top line sales always something you want to evaluate, and we're kind of reconsidering the marketing strategy. Like, how do we interact with technology to target new customers and new students and those that are? How do we interact with them? Because I think one of the magic parts about buying a family business from a retiring couple is they've done things the same way for a long time. So the cash flows you have are protected, but the cash flows for growth may require some new marketing tools, some maybe higher spend on that stuff. So short term, I think we've done a good job of reworking those as well. Long term, the magic of search funds, I think, as opposed to private equity, this is the value prop to a seller. Is we don't have a hold period the same way that a private equity fund would. And if they're closing out their fund, got to liquidate the asset, close it out. For us, we can have the flexibility to be more of an evergreen holder, which I think a lot of small business owners value, particularly if it's a family business. So for us, I think long-term growth strategy for us is really provide high-quality CDL training across North Carolina first, and then kind of spread out into the Southeast. As part of the investment, we had to research both the CDL training market, but also the region. And the Southeast punches above its weight as far as a logistics provider for America. So we see a huge ocean of students in front of us as well, and we're just trying to navigate that small boat on the waves today.
Do you see growth coming from buying more businesses similar or diversifying?
I think the
or
growth,
both.
New brand strategy, probably a mix of both. I think one of the things that in state we notice is you've kind of already got a lot of the compliance infrastructure set up. You've got a relationship with the regulator, so in that case, organic growth might make more sense. You've already got the relationships with your land guy, you're the person who sells you trucks, et cetera. Out of state acquisition might be the way to go because they've kind of already set up the compliance infrastructure for that state. So it's kind of how we think about it.
Is it dramatically different from state to state?
I would say it's probably 85% overlap. There are a couple things that you have to do on a state-by-state basis to comply. I think typically the states that border each other usually look a lot alike in terms
like
of
South Carolina, pretty similar.
Virginia, very, very similar to North Carolina. I would mention also that there's a lot that we can do kind of maybe from a vertical integration standpoint. You think about the way that we train students kind of online. We have service providers on that side. We'd love to own that type of business as well, because I think that would just be an additional competitive advantage for a business like TransTech.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, you guys mentioned that you took classes on entrepreneurship through acquisition. Which when we think about starting businesses, I mean, somebody might have an idea, start from the ground up, do their own thing. Somebody might license an existing franchise or something like that, or acquisition. I mean, did you guys just go down the road of acquisition as the way to go, or do you contemplate starting your own thing, or?
I contemplated starting my own thing. I think I always had a vision of wanting to start something, and I think the root desire of that was kind of the autonomy. Obviously, there's a financial piece of it, but I think when you look at I was very data driven by this, and I knew from my past experience, the fact that it's 90% of small businesses eventually, fail or something like that. There's some crazy high statistics. I mean, not saying it's impossible, because obviously there's a lot of very successful small businesses. But I thought it would be a much faster way to get to the core goal that I was kind of solving for, which was that autonomy, getting to work with people from kind of a management perspective. So kind of taking something that's already in existence, I thought was a much cleaner path. And, Tyrell mentioned this handover demographically. Baby boomers own businesses to the tune of a couple million in the United States, and we're going to see the greatest wealth transfer in the history of the United States over the next decade or so. And if you think about the psychology, if you're the kids of those boomers, it doesn't always make sense. You don't want to run mom and dad's scrapyard. But for people that want that entrepreneurial control and the ability to run your own business, there's a real match to be made there.
And then one of the attractive parts of the acquisition model is you're not having to recontemplate the product or pivot in the same way. You don't have these big existential crises where if you don't get commercial traction, you're like, oh my God, I've got to change things around. We know CDL training is attractive. We know this business has been in business for 30 years. So the value prop exists. It's about being creative around the off the shelf technology we can bring, the tools we've learned in kind of business school. So it feels like a good fit for an MBA to kind of step into as well. But it's also a ton of learning as well, because we're not trucking experts. We were certainly not truck training experts, and certainly not even business experts. But we were engaged enough to say, okay, we can learn this business, plug in some technology, and we don't have to pivot. We don't have to radically change truck driver training tomorrow.
And you work hard.
We do work hard. Yes.
Yeah, it
is. I say it's easier to get to the stage where you're running a business. It doesn't make it any easier than running a business. I think it's just as hard as if you were to have started something, because you still have to keep the ship afloat. You still got people depending on you to make the right decision. So it is a very difficult thing to run a business this size.
So, talk to a little bit about some of the challenges. I'm assuming this is the first time you guys have been at the top of the company, as co-CEOs. I think is your title, and particularly coming into a family business with, I'm sure, a culture that was established, some good, maybe some not so good. That creates challenges for you guys. So, starting as first-time CEOs, what sort of challenges have you run into, and obstacles have you run into?
Well, I would also mention that we're also the youngest employees in the company. So
that's always a challenge.
That presents its own challenge.
What do you guys know?
Exactly.
I think it's one of the first times you have to deal with kind of disciplinary issues. You have to deal with kind of setting the tone and the culture and like how you carry yourself. I think the biggest change is going from ExxonMobil, you have 60,000 employees or something like that. You're a cog. You're not changing the bottom line really any day of the week. And so how you carry yourself, it matters, but really only for your own career, not really for the company as a whole. And your actions matter to you and maybe kind of your immediate surroundings, but they don't challenge the profitability or anything like that. So I think we've definitely spent more time thinking about, okay, well, and comparing it back to that, because we know what's great about working at a GM or an ExxonMobil is they've gone through all the HR policy creation. They've already gone through a lot of the how do we hire people effectively. So a lot of times you're just pulling some of those processes in. I think a lot of people roll their eyes when they hear HR policy and hiring process and those sorts of things. But I think it's actually a really good thing because it creates a fair playing field. And that's what people crave. And it doesn't matter if you're a white collar employee or a blue collar employee. People want to be treated fairly. And I think that's something, particularly in family business, I think, we got lucky. The culture was really good. We saw that, our instructors really cared about, training students. But I think in family business, accountability is tough. It's tough when you're dealing with family members. By having an outside party come in, set some of those ground rules, I think both the employees and even the inter-family dynamics felt more fair.
Yeah, I think from a policy standpoint too, and also the message that after you have a couple of those disciplinary conversations with people, people kind of understand. Okay, this is the bar. The bar is now it's a higher. You got to carry yourself a little bit more professionally. And I think like Tyrell mentioned, like our employees are great, but a lot of them have been there for a long time, and so they might only know kind of one way of kind of coming to work. So getting through some of that messaging was, it takes a little bit of time, some conversations, but I think we are starting to see the benefit of that, and it helps, like Tyrell said, level set everyone's expectations.
Yeah, when you first come in, you're talking about a business that was owned by family for some time, and all of a sudden we got these young guys coming in that don't know anything about the trucking business and anything like that. I mean, how do you? Authority isn't the right word, but how do you sort of establish credibility is the right word of how did you guys go about doing that?
Well, it helped because the old owners, the messages, they chose us. The business was a very competitive process.
It wasn't like a hostile takeover.
That's a good point. That's a really good point.
But it was important to say, we were able to use the old owners, and they were able to communicate as well, like, hey, this is why we went with them. And then we would have them in a couple times for going away celebrations and things like that, invite them in. They were able to talk about, okay, this is how we arrived at this decision to go with these two guys. So that adds some credibility. But also, I think, it's like, it goes back to kind of how you carry yourself. I think if we went in and acted like a couple guys who are 28 years old with these guys who are in their 50s and been, trained students for 30 years, like that would kind of blow a hole in our credibility. But, speaking confidently, maturely, trying to be fair with everyone and not pick favorites. Don't be over emotional. Those are the types of things that seem simple and kind of, self-explanatory, but it really does matter when you get into that position.
And I think we spent in the early days a lot of time kind of frontline, and this was the benefit of the partnership. And so I recommend to any entrepreneur, if you can find a partner that works, do it, because early days, you're kind of first getting more in-depth look at the books. You need the financials. You got to do all those reporting things. So Bob spent a lot of time unwinding kind of what are the accounting processes, how's payroll going out. Like, cash management is the number one thing in the first 30 days of a business. So he was able to tackle a lot of that, whereas I was able on the operations side to go out to those 10 branches, drive across the state on a listening tour. Hey, what's working, what's not? We heard, hey, we need more communication from the top. Great, I can work on building kind of a weekly cadence of which here's the changes we're making that you guys had asked for. Listening to some of that early feedback on, hey, why can't we do it like this? And if it makes sense, implement it. Show that you've implemented it. That builds a lot of credibility. Of finally someone's listening, or if they felt like they couldn't speak at that time.
Yeah, it was interesting, especially in those early days where and it was funny because I hadn't moved to North Carolina yet, so. I was squatting with him and his wife at their apartment, and so we actually commute up to the office together from Charlotte, and use that hour to kind of talk about what we want to work on for that day, and then we kind of break at the office, go work on our things, get back together for lunch. How's it going? Then go back out for the afternoon, and then regroup at the end of the day to drive home. And so, being able to focus on two separate things, really dividing and conquering. I think that's the benefit of having a partner, and emotionally also kind of smoothing out some of those ups and downs, like having someone to
having that time going back and forth.
Yeah,
I was going to ask the question, and you just answered it. Obviously, having a partnership, you were able to do things quicker.
Yes,
and then you also had a sounding board
to
make it work, and so sounds like a great formula.
And 1 + 1.
Of course, you guys got to get along.
Yes.
So on a piece of paper, it sounds great, and obviously you guys vetted yourselves to some extent, and so it really works. Because if you're trying to do it by yourself, it might have been a little bit longer process.
Well, compared to peers that have kind of walked this path, in a solo fashion, is the frontline stuff doesn't stop. You still have to work the credibility, but you also have to understand the book. So the lifestyle that it equates to is okay. From my 8 to 5, I'm doing the frontline stuff, but now from 5 to midnight, I've got to work through the book. So I think there's also just a time component of that where it's a lot more sustainable when you can divide and conquer. But 1 + 1 can equal 3 in this world, but it can also equal 0. And I think one of the things I respect about Bob is, like, I think and I hope he feels the same way, but we can kind of divide the line of like what's our house versus your house, and then kind of final decision on your side of the house. but still,
But together,
together.
it's your house.
Yeah,
All,
together,
both of your
that
houses.
makes sense. Yeah,
But it's probably all captured on one spreadsheet.
at some point. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So as you guys look out into the future, do you see certain challenges and opportunities out there? I mean, every now and then we hear, hey, the trucks are going to be
Autonomous.
autonomous, and we're not going to need truck drivers, which scares the hell out of many of us. But what do you guys foresee out there?
On the self-driving thing, we had to deal with that a lot when we were thinking about buying the business. Most of the estimates say it would be in the late 2030s at the soonest. To give you an example of how long it takes technology to get adopted in the trucking industry, it took them 20 years from when they decided automatic transmissions were better for fuel economy and for safety to then transition over fleets. And that we're just now seeing the fleets are fully automatic from a transmission standpoint. And that's just the transmission. That's not removing the driver. That's not putting 3.5 million people out of work. So we also see the fact that truck drivers are not just driving the truck; they're also doing maintenance. They're inspecting the loads. They're loading and unloading in a lot of cases, fueling the trucks. So we're not too worried about the self-driving thing, at least at this point. It's out there, and we could be proven wrong, but I think also coming from the auto industry, I've seen a little bit of kind of people promising on the self-driving thing just to see it kind of peter out after a couple of years.
Well, I would assume there's lots of infrastructure issues there as well, and that thinking about replacing all the assets that are out there at this point in time is got to be an incredibly expensive proposition. It's
Absolutely.
sort of like electric vehicles. They sound great, but until we have more stations for recharging, it's going to be hard to get it adopted by the masses.
Well, we think electrification and kind of this these technology aids that are coming into the cab actually make the career more desirable. Somewhat taking the mental load off of truck driving and having to shift and do these sorts of things. I think that makes it a more attractive career, along with the salaries also growing. So we saw it from that perspective. Long way out. Don't worry about it, and the market will change around it later. That probably also requires more training to operate those fleets.
The biggest challenge that we're trying to solve, really, and I think the biggest thing for the country that we're trying to solve is kind of reshifting, and Gary talked about this before, but reshifting the mentality around kind of trades as a career. I think there's been a really myopic focus on college as the one only path, and maybe it sounds a little hypocritical coming from a couple college grads, but you do have college costs. The payoff isn't there for a lot of students. A lot of students are dropping out midway, or it's not a path that works for them. And I think in this country, there is a huge alternative path that we've kind of are rediscovering. The HVAC, plumbing, auto
That's
mechanics.
what we're all about at the community college.
Absolutely.
And we talked about
nursing assistants. Yeah.
And you started talking about the return on investment for someone going through your program to what they can make. It's almost this. No, that can't be true. It is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a different lifestyle, but they can make really good money.
Yeah.
Almost immediately.
Yes.
10 years out from CDL school versus college in the state of North Carolina, your salaries are higher if you're a truck driver. It sounds almost too good or too crazy to be true, but it is.
Super. Well, as we sort of wind down a bit, are there any advice that you guys have for aspiring entrepreneurs out there that you can share?
Yeah, I think one is capital is trying to figure out how to solve this big generational problem of the churn of these small businesses. And so, we're obviously biased having walked the path, but I think there is some kind of nobility in it. And it's part of the capitalist system to be actually able to hand over some of these businesses. Because frankly, if there isn't a successor, if there isn't new technology injected into them, those businesses will die,
Yep.
and their employees will be laid off, and that'll create a huge challenge. So I think there is a call to action among millennials, Gen Z, to actually go out, find capital, develop the skills, and buy a small business. I think it's totally viable.
Yeah, same thing. First, I would say do it. I think it was Jeff Bezos that said his psychology when he was starting Amazon was trying to minimize regret when he was on his deathbed. And so, if you feel like you want to start something, you have this entrepreneurial itch, you're trying to minimize the pain of regret in the future, just do it. You'll be kicking yourself otherwise. And then, like Tyrell said, entrepreneurship doesn't have to be, changing the world by starting the next Uber or starting something completely brand new. It can be taking something that's in your local town, a restaurant, a gas station, an oil change place, and making it better, making it your own. So I think you'll get the same satisfaction out of that. You can make it financially successful yourself as well.
Super. Well, Bob and Tyrell, we really appreciate you guys joining us
great.
today. We like to do a little lightning round with our guests if you guys are up for
Sure,
it.
absolutely.
Okay. This month, the lightning round is sponsored by Prestige Worldwide. It's a global entertainment conglomerate and sponsor of the Catalina Wine Mixer. Check them out on the internet. So I got a few quick questions. We'll let you both answer them. You can take turns.
They're a lot harder than ones they've been answering so far.
Yeah. All right. So first question: what is your biggest pet peeve?
Now you know what I was saying.
Biggest pet peeve. I think as a manager, it's certainly intercompany like gossip and things like that. I think that's really tough, and so we try and create a culture of, hey, let's be professional, let's come in. So that's a pet peeve as a manager. At home, I mean, I've got a puppy at home, and so I literally have a pet peeve at home right now. So training a puppy, that's my biggest pet peeve right now.
My biggest pet peeve at home, I think, especially during the summer, is early morning leaf blowers. I for some reason, I feel like that's a bigger issue down here in North Carolina. Maybe because the summer just feels like it extends, for 10 months. I think at the office, we do have an open door policy at our office, but
Those pesky people keep using it?
yes, people that take advantage of it.
Okay.
So, but yeah.
What recommendations do you have for pizza toppings? What do you prefer?
Italian sausage.
Italian sausage.
Yeah.
I like mushrooms and green peppers. I like little vegetables on there. I don't know.
Where do we stand on pineapple?
I'm for it.
Leave it on the trees.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Okay, that's good. What is your go-to adult beverage?
Coke. I just thought
Not
I'd
you,
jump in.
Gary.
I like a lager. Yeah.
Just a lager?
Easy
Yeah,
enough.
you
On a
have any
summer day,
preferences,
yeah.
or it's like a cold lager?
Yingling.
Yeah,
Okay,
wings,
all
yeah.
right. Just simple man, simple taste.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I miss being from Canada. I miss Molson. You guys don't see as much of that down here.
Yeah,
so.
I'm familiar with
Yeah,
Molson.
Molson,
All right. Beatles, Rolling Stones, or Taylor Swift?
I'd go Taylor Swift. Yeah,
Okay.
I would.
Beatles.
No. It's a judge-free zone here. Okay. I mean, I've got a daughter your age. She would agree with you.
Trust me, my daughters would definitely go there.
She's a great businesswoman.
I believe that.
That's exactly right.
All right. Last question: if you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Predict the stock market.
See the future.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. No, just stocks. Yeah.
Teleportation.
Okay. Yeah. Could put you out of business.
It's true. Put the airlines out of business.
All right. Well, look, guys, we really appreciate you joining us. If people want to find out more about TransTech, where should they be looking?
Our website, trans-tech.net. You can also hear us on the radio around Charlotte now, but or any of our branches. Where we have branches in Newton, Charlotte, Gastonia, Asheville, Roxborough, Greensboro, and Greenville, North
Winston-Salem.
Carolina, and Winston-Salem.
And our phone number is 855-CDL today.
All right.
Cool.
Okay. Well, very good. So if you want to find out more about TransTech, you can do that. If you want to find out more about becoming a truck driver, I guess you can go there as well. And you've got a lot of opportunities throughout the state.
Absolutely. And if I can plug one more resource on how to buy a small business, there's a book called The Harvard Business Review's Guide to Buying a Small Business, written by two of our professors. It's like 200 pages, a good read, tells you everything you need to know.
All right, very good.
Fantastic.
Well, we always like to wind up the podcast by giving a shout out to small businesses that we might have come across. I don't know if Bob Tyrell, whether you got any small businesses you want to give a shout out to?
Two of my favorite restaurants here in Newton, actually, Diane's Dairy Counter and 4 Peas in a Pod over on US 70.
I know them well.
Yeah, great spots. Love them.
Sure. I don't know the name of one, but I love the business model, the fuel polishing business. So backup generators, et cetera, diesel generators required at certain hospitals, medical facilities. You have to turn the fuel over every now and again, and they contract that work out. Great business model, small, out of the way, recurring revenue. Love it.
Okay, very good. Gary, what are you going to talk about this month?
Mine's going to be like it always is, a theme of food. And I learned about it at the last Chamber of Commerce board meeting. Taste buds popcorn just opened up in Hickory.
Taste Buds Popcorn? Okay.
Yes. And brought back memories to me when I was in the specialty snack food franchise business many years ago, where we had peanut shacks, cookie stores, coffee T&T, and tin can alleys. And that's when I got my first taste of owning a small business, which turned out to owning 10 of those.
Wow.
And so that was interesting. And I was about your guys' age. So that was about 10 years ago. Not. Is that okay, Joe?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Tin Can Alley, which I mentioned, was a popcorn franchise. And what I learned is you need to sell a lot of popcorn to make money. I'm talking about a revenue model.
Yeah.
But they added candy and sweets to this store, so they're going to do well because it was a combination of all the ones I was involved in. So it just brought back good memories, kind of like my baseball team.
Okay. Well, good deal. I was going to give a shout out to a company called The Wall Printer, which is a Wilmington, North Carolina-based company founded by a fellow named Paul Barron that won the 2023 Coastal Entrepreneur of the Year Award recently. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with vertical printers, but there are printers that can digitally take information and print these 20-foot murals on walls and whatnot. And Mr. Barron's created this business. He's partnered with a company in China that actually manufactures these vertical printers. But basically, he's created a franchise business where he's working with other people to sell the equipment, where they're going into certain territories and offering this as a service to businesses and towns and whatnot. So I haven't ever seen a wall printer before, but it looked pretty cool. And if you go to their website, which is wallprinter.com, you can learn more about them. But it just sort of seemed to be a pretty interesting
Yeah, it's pretty
business.
cool. Yeah.
So anyway, you should check that one out. And if you've got a suggestion for the Entrepreneur Exchange Small Business of the Month, you can email them to us at eexchange@themesh.tv. And if we use your suggestion, we'll give you a shout out and a prize pack. We want to thank Bob and Tyrell for joining us today. We really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you.
We want to thank the Mesh Podcast Network for hosting us as well. You can check out all the shows at themesh.tv and see all the stable of shows that they've got going on. And we'll look forward again to talking with you next month.
Take care.